On today's show, it is this week's edition, of course, of Mailbag Monday, answering a swath of questions from you, the lovely listeners, including topics on Xander Bogaerts' rehab, Luis Arraez, is he overrated or underrated? Javi, why are you calling Farhan Zaidi a sleeper agent? What are you looking forward to for the season? And a whole lot more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Monday, February 24th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, Javiiipeno. Feel free to reach out so you have the chance to be featured on this here Mailbag Monday, because that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be featuring you, the listeners. Go check that out. And go check out my other work on baseball-related topics over at Just Baseball. Fantastic podcast. We'll also be relaunching my other podcast there soon. Today's episode, guys, we are talking mailbag stuff. There wasn't it's been a while, but we didn't really get a whole lot of news. And frankly, that's what happens when you're 3 weeks out of the season starting, more or less 4 weeks to be exact. You get my point. But the vibes are very interesting right now. It really does feel like ever since the Nick Pivetta signing, there is something in the air. It was okay, that's all we asked for. At least that's all I asked for the Padres to do. So there is some excitement in the air for sure. And a lot of things going on, I think, in Major League Baseball now that kind of everything seems officially done, right? We got every big free agent is off the board. We've got a couple of veterans. It feels like the big one we're still waiting on is Jose Quintana. And the Padres were mentioned as a potential suitor. So I would keep an eye out for that. Maybe they're just trying to testing the waters. If their in-house options are really that bad, maybe they go and give Jose Quintana a small deal. We'll see. But otherwise, guys, we're going to be doing mailbag today for sure. And let me tell you, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And getting started with today's podcast, I just want to talk about something really quickly, which is Dennis Lin actually wrote an article for The Athletic about Xander Bogaerts and talking with him about, he's going to be the full-time shortstop this year. They gave him a much bigger heads up this time because last year, as the article mentions, he found out an hour into spring training or whatever that they were doing this because of the, not controversy, but because of the rumors and the potential movement regarding trading Ha-Seong Kim, a player that I am going to miss, and I think he is a very good player, but he ended up getting hurt, of course, for the Pods. He's now signing with the Rays. I remember actually doing an episode back then when I said that I think that the Padres should trade Ha-Seong Kim, and it turns out maybe I was right, but not for the reasons I thought. It's just because he got hurt. What can I say? But overall, that was a weird situation. Bogaerts talked about that in the piece, basically saying this was a weird transition. It's tough. And not to mention that, but also with the injuries that he'd been dealing with his shoulder, diving. I believe it was against the Brewers when he dove for a ball and it just kind of went wrong. That happens with shortstops sometimes. Article also talks about he's cut some weight down. He's been exercising differently. He's been mentally preparing since November, and they told him in December this time instead of, March, right? So that's kind of where we're at right now, I think, with Bogaerts. I am feeling slightly optimistic about him. The article also mentioned, and it is true, he has 770 OPS after coming back, so he was at least a decent offensive player. He won't be this 580 OPS guy. I don't think he's going to be this necessarily a below 100 WRC plus guy, but the concerns are still there. But I have to admit, while I don't really have a lot of statistical evidence, and I haven't read any pieces, feel free to link me if there have been people writing about Xander Bogaerts lately, but there hasn't been any statistical evidence that gives me confidence that Xander Bogaerts is going to be able to return to what he was in Boston. And frankly, just even what he was that first year with the Padres. While he was a little bit weird with the Padres, don't get me wrong, he still was a guy who slugged a decent amount. He hit a good amount of doubles. He hit 19 home runs, which is pretty good. And he provided pretty good defense over at shortstop. Maybe not, Francisco Lindor defense, but pretty good defense nonetheless. And last year does deserve credit. He actually played pretty okay at second base. And in the words of Mike Schilt, was a plus defender. I really do love how much Schilt hypes up his players. You know what I mean? He is not subtle. You know what I mean? He's like, I think this guy's amazing. This guy's you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I really like how much he hypes up his players. And that's another storyline this year. I'm curious to see whether the fan base turns on another manager. We'll see what happens, I guess, with Schilt heading into this year, depending on how well the Padres fare. But I have to admit, I'm really just sticking by my very non-statistical, kind of non-empirical analysis, which is just that he's Xander Bogaerts, and I'm having a tough time believing that he's just going to be this 95 WRC plus guy already. Like, so maybe that's something like that can happen later, but this is not a player that's always counted on power. This is a guy who hits a lot of doubles. Don't get me wrong. He at one point led the major leagues in doubles. Like, every single year he was just kind of automatic when it came to doubles, right? Like, this is a guy who would hit basically 30 every single season, at least 30. He hit 31 in 2023. I just think that overall what we're looking at here is still a batter who can be valuable. I do think that it depends on your expectations, right? If your expectations for Bogaerts are predicated upon, I need him to live up to the 11-year deal, I think that the chances of that happening are very slim, but can he deliver like a 120 WRC plus? That would be amazing. Can he deliver a 115, 113? That, I think, is a little bit more of the floor. I just think that I'm just not buying it. I think he's had to deal with a bunch of injuries these first 2 years. And don't get me wrong, the reason why I've been down on him and why I'm worried about him not ever living up to the contract is because he has a long-term wrist injury that isn't necessarily going to get immediately fixed or whatnot, right? But in general, that's kind of how I'm feeling. I just feel like Bogaerts, I have some hope that he's going to be able to turn it around, at least be a decent player. Would I be surprised if he goes down as a 3.5 win player this year? No, I actually think that would be pretty valuable for this team, assuming that the other players stand fold. I actually think Manny Machado is going to have a good season. Hit a home run, by the way, first pitch of spring training over the weekend. That was fun. I think Jackson Merrill, Michael Bauman wrote a great article over at Fangraphs that I think he's probably going to be a really good player. The question is how good. Right? How awesome is he going to be, this guy? And then Fernando Tatis Jr., he's like has the 7th highest projected home run total according to most projections. Like, this guy is probably going to be awesome. He just needs to stay healthy. I think there's a lot of good on this team. And Luis Arraez, I think, is going to be great too. We have some questions about him that we're going to get into. So I think overall, though, Bogaerts, I just don't think that they need too much from him. We have to accept that this is probably an F tier deal. We have to accept that this is not going to be a deal that ages well. But is it Hosmer? Not just yet, right? I think we still have some time, and I do have some faith that he's going to turn it around. But yeah, that's it for my opening soapbox, guys. Let's get into some questions because we've actually got a bunch this week, which will be fun. So I'm really, really, really excited to get into them. Let us start with a hater question. That's right, everybody. From @Shaggy_do 13 on YouTube. We're 4th in division. Book it. We have more guys collecting Social Security on this team than badasses. Come to grips, people. Bring the hate. So as much as I'm being optimistic there, one of the kind of trends that I've seen in comment sections lately, or at least on just my videos, is it is a very polarizing team. Like, this Padres team is very polarizing, and for good reason. This is a team that really blew it in the playoffs, and then they lost some of their best hitters, right? Donovan Solano, Kyle Higashioka, Jurickson Profar, even Ha-Seong Kim, right? A defensive stalwart, right? And you lose all of that, and you basically didn't bring anything back, and then you have the ownership strife, and then you have the Dodgers just adding people like it's going out of style. So I understand why people are out of it. And then you look at another team, the Giants. They made a big move. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. Go check out my episode with Ben Kaspick from last week. I think they're very weird, although I do think that I'm starting to be like, dude, they really just let Buster Posey running the team? That's a little weird. But anyway, that was a big one. And then, of course, the D-backs. I think the D-backs are going to be incredible this year. And if they're going to be incredible, that probably implies that the Padres maybe not so much. So, again, I understand why people are down on the team, but that is one thing I've noticed is very, very polarizing takes on this team. And we're going to read more of them, guys. We're going to read more of them because it's the mailbag. And I have to read all of your guys' questions and comments because that's what I do as the prestigious host of the Locked On Padres podcast. So that's what we do, baby. It's what we do. I don't know why I'm getting quiet and soft all of a sudden. But before we get into more questions, guys, just need to take a second to hear a word from one of our sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, you know about them. They're fantastic. We've talked about them basically at the beginning of every show for what feels like forever, and that is the good folks over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love it. I love it, folks. They got all sorts of betting ideas for you. They got all sort of parlays. They got all sort of spreads. They got all sort of props. And let me tell you, when it comes to the NBA, I feel like a lot of people are going to be paying attention to this. Luka Doncic, tomorrow, against the Mavericks, first time, and they've been slighting him at every chance. They're calling him fat. They're saying he's not a championship player, despite the fact that he's been first-team All-NBA for the past 5 seasons, right? All of these different things. They're blacking him out of the social media videos. They're blurring him out. It's just this whole ridiculousness. So, if you want to get in on that, the revenge Doncic game, FanDuel's your place to go, man. Let me tell you. And right now, again, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Continuing on with some of the mailbag, I actually found an old mailbag message that I didn't address last time. It's from my guy Rama Murdy, and I'm talking about this one because I just did an episode recapping, and frankly just getting nostalgic and just trying to be joyful on Friday's episode about the last 5 years of Padres baseball. And Rama commented, "Love seeing it. High moments for us old-time Padres fans are 1984 season and the NLCS comeback against the Cubs, 96 beating the Dodgers 3 straight to win the NL West title, 98 season and the run to the World Series, the 2020 season and the series against the Cardinals, and of course 22 NLDS against the Dodgers in 24 season and the playoffs." And we don't have to talk about the low moments that you posted here. I want to give a shout out that I really think that it's kind of interesting, the 84 team versus the 96 or 98 teams, where 96 was probably a better offensive team. You actually got a little bit out of Ricky Henderson at the twilight of his career, and Steve Finley had a great season, and 98 makes the World Series. And it's just, I find it interesting because, first of all, the 84 team just has like this really weird like nostalgia to it that I get for a lot of people, even though not everything went super, super great, especially with Wiggins. I'm blanking on his first name, who just seems to have a lot of personal problems. But 84 was a weird team, but the aura was there. Like the aura of that 84 team is actually pretty incredible. It kind of is still, I think, what a team that Padres fans are super nostalgic about. And then 96 and 98 has like multiple players that are like Hall of Famers. You've got Gwynn there, and then you've got Ricky Henderson, and then while not necessarily Hall of Famers, but Caminetti and Steve Finley were very, very good players too. I don't know, good teams. Really fun teams to talk about. So that's it, though. And then you have this new era of Padres, and that's basically it. Otherwise, that's Padres history right there. In terms of other future questions, though, let me see. We've got one from @RJPG. Says, "Love this recap. I followed Padres right when Gwynn was a rookie. The past 5 years were definitely the most exciting in the entire 50-plus years of the franchise, except for the World Series years. I really hope we have more of this the next 5. Me too, sir." And again, I think that's why I did the episode. It was just kind of like, let's remember that it hasn't always been good. You know what I mean? And it's good to at least be at a point where at least you're interesting. You don't want to be boring and bad. You know what I mean? At least if the Padres are bad this year, we have stuff to talk about, maybe. I think, right? We'll see. Moving on, though. This one coming from Mr. Cam Wordplay. The top 4 hitters on the current roster will be Arraez, Tatis, Merrill, and Machado, most likely in that order. The team won 93 games last year and scored a lot of runs, despite 3 of those guys being injured or less than 100% for much of the season. And Merrill, who stayed healthy all last year, was buried at the bottom of the batting order for much of the year. If those 4 stay healthy for most of 2025, we should be around 90 wins again, as 3 of them have MVP top 5 potential. Beyond that, we need both Crone and Bogey to drive in 70-80 runs and get some solid contributions from left field, DH, and catcher. I would still like to see us sign Jose Iglesias or JD Martinez to add some length to our lineup and strength to our bench. Campy, Hayward, Joe, and Gurriel are all big question marks. I have to admit, signing Yuli, Gurriel and then not JD Martinez is a little bit weird. Just a little bit odd. I don't know exactly what they're going to be doing there. I guess it's like a roster thing. Maybe they just want someone who could play backup at third base or whatever the heck, right? Like, Yeah, the signings aren't great. I will say that Jason Hayward, I think, is a fine defensive replacement type of player, right? Like there are certain days where, assuming Tatis is playing, at his top level, like there will be days when that outfield is just going to be really solid, just really, really good with a Gold Glover, a Platinum Glover, and a guy who basically is only in Major League Baseball at this point because of the defense and Hayward. Like that's pretty good. And then Connor Joe, maybe he adds some flexibility, the fact that he could play outfield and play first base, maybe give Arraez the day at DH. Cronenworth can be second a lot more. I don't mind the additions. It's just, I do agree with you though, that it's just like, I would have liked a little bit more oomph, but we'll see how that breaks down. And I do think you make a great point though. Bogaerts and Manny, but Manny we literally saw was hurt for basically the first 2 months of the season. Right, like that's basically what we saw. Is the first 2 months, and it's all entirely the health thing. And he says that he's super healthy, so we might get I've been saying that I think the MVP potential of Manny is gone. There's a decent shot he's like a 5-win player. Like it wouldn't shock me. That's not MVP level, but it wouldn't shock me. Like it really, really wouldn't. So I'm keeping an eye on that. Great point about Bogaerts. Great point about Tatis. I do think that while a lot went right for the bench players for the Padres, it's possible that for the stars that didn't fully turn up until later and they were, battling some injuries, that could make up for it. So I'm with you on that, man. Appreciate the optimism. Lebowski619 says, this Padres broadcast, along with one or two others, are low-key big value. Javi knows ball, and I enjoy the more cerebral analysis in this particular video. I watch every video. Thanks for always posting. And thank you for commenting. Good, sure. That was commenting on the Friday episode. I appreciate it very much and always appreciate the kind comments. At Silas Robert Shaw 8122 says, yo man, did you get a new camera or just change the lighting? Pictures way clearer. As to the championship window, I think the goal is to build a team that is competitive every year and can bring in free agents to fill out the roster to consistently have a chance to make a deep run. That's what I've been claiming for over the last decade. Just want to allude to that really quick. Like, I always bring this up, but one of my best friends, he was so ecstatic at the 2015, the infamous 2015 Preller moment. A lot of people might be shocked by that because they're like, wow, they traded a lot of prospects, including Trey Turner, for Will Myers, Justin Upton, who was fine, and Matt Kemp, who was blah, and then Craig Kimbrell, who was good, but you didn't need him for a team that just wasn't getting as many wins. And I believe James Shields, the last one, he was just excited because his perspective was just like, dude, I just like that we're trying and we're not holding on to prospects forever. So I kind of relate to that sentiment. And next, yeah, I just kind of fixed the lighting in this room. It was really messy. The camera's always been really solid, but the lighting, the circuits, it's not even just that I didn't put light bulbs in, I promise. We've had some light issues in my house. So, that was kind of the issue. And frankly, I didn't know if this was going to be loved as much. I didn't know if the glare was going to bother people. So appreciate it, man. But yes, just lighting, man. Lighting changes everything. Just ask anybody who has ever been on camera. It really does change everything. Another question from my guy, Rama Murdy, who's been leaving a lot of stuff. One of my number one commenters. Got to show him love. Love the recap. I started listening to the podcast just after the pandemic started. Question for Monday's show. What are you most excited about for the team heading into the season, and what are you most concerned about? Also, what are the 2025 Zips projections for Profar and Higgy? Will they duplicate their 2024 seasons or go back to what they were previously? Zips is actually lower on Higgy and Profar. They actually have them being 1.5 win players. Higgy, I believe, 1.1. I'm a little bit surprised on the Profar thing. I get it, but it's just weird that all the data from Profar last year, at least most of it, is yeah, this was legit. You don't increase your contact rate that much when you're swinging outside the zone and increase your hard hit rate and have a better weighted on base. There's just things that he did that suggest that he's going to be a solid hitter. That being said, I do understand the fear with his defense and whatnot. But again, I also think Atlanta's smart. Atlanta doesn't really miss on these type of deals. They don't miss on anything. So I think they know this is a pretty legit deal. So I don't agree with that one. The Higgy one I get. He basically was pulling every fly ball. Every fly ball that he was putting out into the air was going super deep, and a lot of them turned into home runs. I think they're basically saying solid backup catcher. And especially, he's not going to be playing as much. So I think that's why the WAR total won't be as high, because they have Jonah Heim. And Jonah Heim's really, really good. So that's going to be a really good catching platoon. Rangers, team I'm very, very excited to see this year, because I'm always a fan of just teams that bounce back with a vengeance. They get healthy. I don't know. It's just cool to see, because you love to see teams with a lot of talent, especially a lot of spending, live up to that type of ability. In terms of most exciting and concerned, I'd say most excited for this season is easily Tatis. Like, I really think that this could be it, right? Like, I really do think that the Tatis thing could be awesome this year. And then most concerned would be Bogaerts. Like, the Bogaerts numbers are just really daunting, and his hard hit rate, his walk rate, his isolated power have all been down progressively over the last few years. So I am really concerned with him, even though I am hopeful as of late that it's got to get better than this, right? That's just kind of my vibe. But yeah, I'm super excited for Tatis. And I think that also there's just some potential with Pivetta. Like, I really do think that it's not impossible that they do well with him. We're going to talk more about the pitching rotation and how low-key the Padres have actually done a really good job at developing it over the past few seasons on Wednesday or Thursday's episode. We'll see. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, that's cliche answers, but what can I say? I'm a bit of a cliche sometimes. But guys, let me tell you, we're not done. Oh, we're not even close to done, folks. No. We're not even close to done. We're not even close. We're not. And we're going to get back into talking about some of your questions and comments in just a little bit. But first, a few words from our sponsors. And just like that, everybody, we're back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Feel free to follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky again at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Send me questions also in the YouTube. I tend to read a lot from there and be featured on next week's mailbag episode. Just like my guy, RJPG again, commenting. We appreciate you, good sir. He said, good show. The Brit knows his stuff. Shout out to my guy Alex Williamson when we talked about Arraez, as well as our awesome host. Thank you, sir. I wasn't knowledgeable about WAR, and this was a good intro, especially explaining WAR value. For me, Mr. Padre, I wonder how Tony Gwynn's WAR value is, basically, compared to all of this stuff. Tony Gwynn's WAR is very, very good. He had a very good career. I don't think that Tony Gwynn is like Roberto Clemente or anything like that, but one of the things that I get a lot, right, and actually I believe we have another comment on here that I'm just going to read really quickly. This one coming from Ron Murdy again. Arraez reminds me so much about Tony Gwynn. He just needs to learn to take more pitches. Hopefully, being fully healthy this season, he can be more pesky and drive up a pitch count so the other hitters behind him can rake after a pitcher is already at least 10 pitches into his outing. Agreed. The Gwynn comparisons are understandable, but I do think in some degrees they're a little bit off. Tony Gwynn, first of all, was a lot better defensive player. He just was. Like this, he was just a much better defensive player, and that's really important. He didn't start out that way, right? He wasn't like an elite Gold Glover or anything like that, but he was a very good defensive player. And then also, he walked a lot more, right? That's the big thing with him, is he was a little bit more patient of a hitter. And no, he didn't ever hit for like a lot of power. I think he only had one season when he just kind of hit for a lot of power. I'm trying to load Fangraphs right now. But of course, as I tried doing that live on the show, it will never show up for me in time. But no, he only had one season, I think. Yeah, he had one season where he hit 14 home runs, like at the apex of his career. And then he also had a 17 home run season in 97, 16, 10 through 1999. That was the thing with him. Just had a much better on base. He was more consistently an on base threat, and he laced a few more doubles, a little bit more power than I think Luis Arraez had. Arraez did not even hit some doubles, right? Like he's not necessarily been that type of player, but I still think he can be a bit of a pest. I really do. I think that he can, and I'm really excited for him. And I think him being healthy is big. But yeah, in terms of WAR, that's the big thing. That's the really big thing. It's just that Gwynn got more Gold Gloves in right field, and he was just better, especially at a time when right field, I think, was a little bit better during that period, and he was just better defensively, and he walked a little bit more. So that's it for Gwynn. And speaking of analytics, at Carlo Ferraro says all are overrated. Owners are paying the price for their attitude with the catfish hunter issue. From there, they are taking their own poison medicine. I don't know what you mean by catfish hunter. I want to make sure I'm being clear here that you're saying analytics are overrated. That's how I'm going to read it, good sir. Feel free to respond to the video if I'm wrong. Analytics are not overrated. It just depends on what we're talking about. Analytics are overrated, I think, in the thick of a moment, right? Perfect example being Blake Snell against the Dodgers, right? Like the Rays took him out and he was dealing, and they took him out, and more importantly, they took him out for a guy who'd been dreadful all offseason, or I should say all playoffs, just because their numbers were like, well, he should do better. And then what happened? He got absolutely torched, right? So That's a better example. But in general, analytics are very helpful because they tell you, hey, guess what? Derek Jeter, just because he didn't make an error doesn't mean he's a good defensive player. He actually just didn't have a lot of range and a lot of arm strength, right? So it could be misleading. I think that analytics are helpful. I do think what me and Alex talked about that I do agree with, though, is it does make the game a little boring, where it's like, I don't like that when I debate baseball, everyone immediately pulls up a StatCast page, or a baseball reference page or a Fangraphs page. In basketball and football, there aren't as many all-encompassing stats. They don't have a WAR stat. They don't have a WRC plus stat. They just have some stats that tell you a lot, but not the full story. Oh, Justin Herbert, he has a low amount of yards per game, but he has the best on-target percentage. He doesn't have any turnovers, and he doesn't have that many good receivers. Oh, this one quarterback, his offensive numbers are through the roof. He leads the league in yardage and all that stuff, but he's got Tyreek Hill and, Jalen Waddle, an amazing run game, and just throws a lot of passes behind the yards of scrimmage. Like, there's a lot of things that go into this, but also that player has to get the ball out because the offensive line is weak. In basketball, the defensive rating is low, but that's because they have to switch all the time because one of their other teammates isn't good on defense or they're playing too many minutes. I like that. I think about other sports. It's a little bit of a weakness for baseball, though. I think that's what analytics is the negative for. But in terms of being overrated, no, I think they really help you. Speaking again of analytics and Arraez, the Mr. Hope Springs Eternal. I know you don't ever comment in good faith, but I like reading your comments anyway. The Padres would not have gotten to the playoffs without Arraez. Why is there even a discussion here about him being overrated? I do not think Luis Arraez was the reason that the Padres made the playoffs. The Padres, don't get me wrong, Arraez was solid for the team, but in terms of overall numbers last year, and again, there's reason for this. He was hurt, right? Like we've talked about this before. I think he's been kind of bullish about this too. But in terms of WRC plus, he was all the way behind David Peralta in WRC plus. He had a 111 last year. Donovan Solano, Manny Machado, Jackson Merrill, Fernando Tatis Jr., and Jurickson Profar all ranked ahead of him. He was solid, but he didn't give you a season last year because he was hurt. That would be ineclipsable. I don't even know if that's a word. There are other somewhat okay players that could have gone in that same role and been better or just as good and maybe just been a little bit better defensively. Arraez at his top of his game when he's really good, that's what I think could get the Padres into the playoffs. But no, he's not the reason they made the playoffs. He was actually not very good. The reason they made the playoffs was because of Profar, Solano, Merrill, Higashioka. That's why they made the playoffs, because those guys just went absolutely nuts last year. And then they got some good production out of Tatis and Manny, especially as the season went along. But continuing on, we've got another one. We've got another good one. We've got one from my guy, LFGSD. Padres, nice haircut, Javi. Lights look good too. Dang, Yuki signed. Can't wait to hear your take on him. I don't know if this was an old comment. It didn't look like it, but my guy, Roki, was a while ago. And a big middle finger to all the haters. Javi is the best. On a side note, Javi, I heard that Eggy might play in left. I have heard that too. Very slight whispers. I doubt it though. They're probably going to use Connor Joe and Jason Hayward. But I do think they're going to want to try and find some space for Eggy. He has a platoon problem, but I just think that he's got decent defensive skills, especially in the infield. He's got a pretty good glove and he's got good power. So I think he could be probably the best bench piece on this team if they use him properly. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point in the season when they swap DH responsibilities between Arraez and Eggy. I would not be surprised if they did that. I really wouldn't. I actually think that could 100% happen, depending on what happens with Hayward and Cronin and Connor Joe, etc., how they mesh the lineup together. And Tirso Ornelas, that's another one we're going to have to follow for spring training, so we'll see. At Eddie Hirsch says, I love how Ben Kaspick reamed Javier over his ridiculous Farhan sleeper agent comment. That was great. First of all, for those who didn't go check out my podcast with Ben. I was being a little bit facetious. I don't literally think that Farhan's a sleeper agent, guys. Relax. But it is just funny to talk about how this is a guy who didn't do stuff with the Giants, right? He wasn't super successful, and he didn't trade Blake Snell to say another team that could have used him, and then mysteriously Farhan then gets a job with the Giants or with the Dodgers, and then they get Blake Snell over him for money, right? So it's mostly a joke. I'm only kidding. Relax. And no, Ben did not ream me. He was just no, I disagree. Next comment though. From Rama Murdy again. We had a lot from you this week, my guy. Chill out. I'm kidding. Very happy about Don Orsillo being signed to a long-term contract. Would love an episode on his top 10 calls, along with hearing or seeing those calls. Maybe. I don't know if I can actually put the calls on YouTube, but I could definitely talk about some of my favorites at some point. We'll see, though. I'll keep that one in mind. Yuli Gurriel is just another guy in camp, and worst case, he's depth at AAA. Agreed. This team is pitching and defense, and if everyone hits the way they're capable of hitting, we have a chance to win it all. Mike Shildt is a top-notch manager who has that hunger as well, too, so I think our window is still open for several years to come. Also, keep in mind the young talent we have in the minors like Salas and DeVries. That will help keep the window open longer. I agree mostly, except that I think that the farm system, we're going to have to wait and see how it develops over the course of the year, because right now it's very top-heavy. It's basically just Salas and DeVries. DeVries, I think, could be a next-year guy. I think he could be next year, and I think that could be really, really interesting. I don't know what the Padres are going to do with their configuration there. But Salas, I think he's a little bit of a ways off, even if the potential is through the roof. Just a couple more questions, though. Why did Don leave? Speaking of Don Orsillo, at Steven Krasner 5532, why did the Red Sox let Don Orsillo go? Details? Some investigative journalism, please. I don't know if you meant it in that tone. I'm just saying, I don't know why you said it like that, man. Like, don't worry. Okay, relax. We don't really know, and I'm not really super plugged into the Red Sox world. All I know is that it hasn't been pretty. Don Orsillo has really, like, it's been rough. Like, he issued a statement, or I should say he made a comment back when he visited. This was, I believe it was last year, in June. He was like, I believe when you're fired from a team, you lose your allegiance to that team as far as caring whether they win or lose, he said. That was part of the deal. If I'm out, so are they. I can't be a fan of someone who's not a fan of mine. You're going to like someone who despises you or replaces you? I couldn't do it. My allegiance had to end, especially where I went to another franchise, or especially when I went to another franchise, where I am vested. I am invested. I can't speak. The fandom ended. Now, my love for the Bruins, Celtics, and Patriots has not changed. They didn't fire me. It's just like, it hasn't been good. And there was like a ceremony, I believe, a couple years ago, and Orsillo wasn't even invited to that. It wasn't a great ending for those guys. And basically, from what I understand, it's as simple as they blamed him and the broadcast booth for the ratings being down for Red Sox games on NESN, the Boston, not news network, but the Boston, network, sports network. That they blamed him for the ratings being down instead of the team being bad. Right, and this is also a team that then followed that up by, not only do they dump Don Orsillo, but they dump Mookie Betts. So it's NESN and it's John Henry. It's ridiculous. They basically blamed him. That's basically what I get from this. Dumb? Of course it's dumb. But when has that ever been something that precludes rich people from making decisions, right? So that's kind of what we know about Don Orsillo. Last comment that I think is really important to address for me especially, at Mike VQ8ZW says, I think Yuli is only a controversy in the fans' mind. The fans are making something big out of nothing. If it was any problem at all, he would have never been signed. The window is shut on this team because the organization is no longer trying to put the best team on the field. Too many holes filled by nobodies, and the fact that chances are Dylan Cease will probably be traded, so the starting rotation will not be as strong as it looks now. Even if the starting staff stays together, there isn't enough offense on this team to win consistently. AJ will continue to make moves to try and win one season at a time, rather than lay out any kind of game plan for the future, especially since his contract is coming to an end soon, thank God. Wow, a lot of negative there. First, let's talk about AJ. And Dylan Cease. No, Cease is not getting traded. I think that Cease is only getting traded if that Orioles offer comes in. If the Orioles are like, fine, we'll give you Basalo or we'll give you Kobe Mayo and we'll give Kierstad and whatever. We're really desperate and whatnot. It could also happen if the Padres aren't very good at the deadline and if there is a team that is good that has those prospects. So, for example, if the Red Sox are awesome, I would be like, yeah, I think that they might be like, you know what, maybe we give up one of our guys because we want to make a run at the title right now. Orioles, same thing, right? That's the only way I think that they're trading Dylan Cease. So I disagree with that notion. The next part, the idea, if it was any problem at all, he would never have been signed. You don't follow sports, if that's how you view things. You just don't. Like, that's just not how this works, right? If you're talking about if there's a problem between him and Darvish, okay. But if you're talking about this idea that, like, someone could have bad character things and teams won't sign him, it's like, may I introduce you to Deshaun Watson? May I introduce you to, even before he was suspended, Trevor Bauer? May I introduce you to a host of other players, Aroldis Chapman? I think Yasiel Puig, I don't want to say Yasiel Puig. I forgot what it was with him exactly, but there's been a lot of bad people in all sports that get signed anyway. So I do disagree with that. And again, I think that that's what I talked about on Friday's show, which again, and not to get, I know that people, especially these days, get annoyed when people like myself talk this way, but in my experience, it's a lot easy for people of color to just kind of keep their head down and be like, no, it's fine, and they don't want to get into it, because then they are often viewed as a problem in this culture, in this society, and whatnot. We're living in a society when you talk about and speak up about racist acts and whatnot. But I do agree, it was a long time ago, and as it was discussed in multiple reports, I imagine that they consulted him. I just want to throw it out there, guys, that that doesn't mean it's okay. That doesn't mean it's cleared. Because, like I said, when you're in these kind of positions as a person of color, you're like, all right, I would rather just not make a big deal of it, because then it becomes a whole thing. So sometimes you just have to take things, and it stinks. It stinks that it's that way. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm not saying that's what happened in this situation. It's just what is in my experience. But also really important to note, Darvish and him did kind of clear the air back when this happened in 2017. I am just wondering, why would you introduce this element? Even if they did clear the air, they haven't been on the same team. You know what I mean? So maybe it's a little bit easier from afar to clear the air. I just don't know why you introduce that element for a player that hasn't been good for a while. That's what my opinion is. It's not like they signed, another Donovan Solano type player where you're like, wow, they were actually pretty good last year. That's kind of how I feel. But again, we'll see how it pans out. I'm just hoping that Darvish stays healthy and is still as fun to watch and scintillating of a performer as always. We very much love that, guys. But with that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Tomorrow's episode, we are talking about my notes to watch for spring training. That should be a lot of fun. And then Wednesday, talking a little bit about the pitching for the Padres. And then we might have a special guest on Thursday. And then Friday, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know just yet. Look, guys, it's crazy times out here. We got to work. But I will figure out what we're doing. But that's just the immediate plan for this podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, until next time, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.